second question is, how do you see the implementation of the one country and two systems in Hong Kong so far? Because the opposition and maybe some Western countries has criticized that Hong Kong has been proved failure for this system.
You know, the last century was the time when the imperial European, North American countries withdrew from the colonies they occupied around the world. And the way in which they changed those countries is not an example of how to achieve transition and progress. The return of Hong Kong was a great example of British diplomacy in coming to terms with returning part of China to the Chinese people, to the Chinese government, and it was a very impressive diplomatic achievement, the 1984 agreement. And in general, it's worked quite well. Hong Kong has prospered, and things have advanced quite well. Compared to most parts of, say, Africa, the situation is far better in Hong Kong. The people and government of Hong Kong have worked well, and they've prospered enormously from the association, from being back within China. There are difficulties, and you can't change 150 years of history in 15 or 20 years. You're going to have problems and difficulties. And, you know, it's not a coincidence that at the same time as there is a tariff war with the United States and China, there is disturbance in Hong Kong. You know, we say in the Western world, if the parents argue, the children will behave badly. So I don't want to reduce this to a trivial example, but because there are these difficulties in the world, people in Hong Kong have to be very careful not to act foolishly in the face of changing forces in the world. And there are a lot of major changes happening in the geopolitical world and in the economic world. And Hong Kong wants to be very sure that it wants to be a major financial center and a major legal center, and become what I think the Greater Bay Area will become, which is a sort of capital for Southeast Asia. And Hong Kong can be a key part of that. It's very well accepted across Southeast Asia. So when you look at some of the things that have happened, yes, there are some people who want to prove China wrong, who want to make criticisms of China, who don't like the one-party system, who don't like the great success of China that comes with the one-party system. I've seen this all my life, that people find it very hard to accept that there are different ways of doing things, and different systems can work. And they also don't understand very well the Chinese history. The single-party system has a lot to do with Chinese history. So when you look at Hong Kong, Hong Kong has got a difficulty to adjust from 150 years of British colonial rule to being part of China. That is a natural problem. Is it an example of China failing with Hong Kong now? The Hong Kong people are masters of their own destiny. They've got a great opportunity. If they don't want to take it and they want to hold back, that's the decision they'll make. But the only people who will suffer the consequences of that is Hong Kong, because China will progress. You know, when I first started doing business in 1972 with China, really there were only three ports: Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Tianjin. Now there are many different ways that China can do its business with the outside world. There are trains running all the way through to the west. There are many other ports around China that are open. So the situation of Hong Kong is less exclusive than it was 50 years ago, even 30 years ago. That creates some uncertainty in the minds of young people in Hong Kong. But I think that they have been misled by people who have said to them that there is an alternative way for them to progress. There's not. You know, they're being misled. The way for them to obtain their objectives is through being successful and showing Beijing that they have very interesting ideas of how to progress. If they think that President Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party intends that China will stay the way it is today, politically and governmentally, in 50 years' time, no, of course not. China is very different today from the way it was 40 years ago. So China is changing and transforming, and Hong Kong can play its part in that. What it can't do is force change, because China is 1.4 billion people, not 10 million people, and they have to allow for change to seep through. You know, Shenzhen progressed from being a small fishing village to being a very significant city within quite a few years. But now look at it, it has Alibaba, it has Tencent, it has Huawei. Some of the most modern companies of the world are based in Shenzhen. But Shenzhen hasn't asked Beijing to change and enable Shenzhen to be different from everywhere else. It has waited for it to be given the opportunities to develop. And I think that is one of the things that I have understood from, frustratingly, from Chinese culture. When I've done business with China, people have said to me, wait to be asked, don't ask. And I say, well, I come from the West and we're encouraged to ask. And they say, well, if you explain yourself, then we understand you. But the Chinese way is different, and it will help you do better business in China if you understand the Chinese way and how Chinese people react. So Hong Kong has got something to learn from having had British masters, and then in a way it's had Chinese tycoon masters. Not the best example for being able to settle within China. Now it's realizing that the Chinese tycoon masters and the British colonial and tycoon masters are not the way to look for the future. So yes, there is criticism of China. Would I have done anything differently? No. I mean, the question is, do I think that Governor Patton was right to try and introduce democracy in 1992? No, it's 50 years too late if that was the British interest, not just before 1997. And he left a residue of trouble in Hong Kong. He gave people ideas that things could be achieved that are not realistic. Whether I agree with them or not is another matter. I live in the UK. We have our own system. And if China came to the UK and tried to change our system to the Chinese system, I would be very, very fierce in my opposition. But that's not what's happening. Hong Kong is becoming part of China, and it has to absorb into the Chinese system over 50 years. And if it wants to go further away from the Chinese system during this time, it'll have some problems.
So far, the chief executive of Hong Kong, Carrie Lam, has said some days earlier that she is willing to talk with some opposition in Hong Kong. But maybe the opposition has rejected the talks with her.
Yes.
What do you think is the best strategy for the Hong Kong and the Chinese government to solve this problem?
Well, Carrie Lam was in London for many years, and she enjoyed a very good relationship with the British here. She was well respected. She argued a different position, but she argued it clearly, and she listened to the British, and whatever conclusion she came to, we respected her. She was well regarded. With the situation in Hong Kong, I think it has something to do with the way the publishers were handled in Hong Kong. I think that maybe when people look back and see how that was handled, they may regret it. I don't know why you need to have extradition. If it's one country, then you don't need extradition. But if you do need extradition, if that is the legal process that's required, I want to hear the lawyers comment on it. I've only heard one lawyer from Hong Kong comment on it who was in favour of the extradition law, who said it's clear and it's fair. I don't know. I've not seen any public debate on it, but it's clearly better for the people of Hong Kong to have a clear extradition law with China than to have nothing, and for other methods to be used. It's not a good situation. So when the thing broke out over extradition, I was a bit surprised, but it soon became clear that wasn't the major issue. The major issue was about voting and democracy and these sorts of things. And I don't think Carrie Lam could have dealt with that, because you can't say, well, we have